The relentless Arizona sun beat down on Tucson in the summer of 1993, a familiar, almost comforting weight to Sarah Jenkins. At 29, she was a creature of routine, her life a carefully choreographed dance around her two young children, Emily, 7, and David, 4. Every morning, the desert dawn painted the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender, a silent promise of the scorching heat to come. Sarah would rise before the sun, her small, two-bedroom home in the quiet northeast side of the city still steeped in pre-dawn cool. The air, before the sun claimed its full dominion, held a unique desert crispness, hinting at the vast, untamed wilderness that lay just beyond the city's sprawl. Her days were a tapestry of school runs, grocery trips to the Safeway on Grant Road, a route etched into her memory, and her part-time job as a dental assistant at Dr. Ramirez's office. She loved the clean, clinical smell of the office, the precision of her work, and the brief, often humorous interactions with patients. It was a reprieve from the constant demands of motherhood, a space where she was just Sarah, not Mommy. But her thoughts always drifted back to Emily's bright, questioning eyes and David's infectious giggle. They were her world, the vibrant, beating core of her existence. Sarah often mused about the future, about Emily's burgeoning artistic talent, David's boundless energy and curiosity. She saw college, careers, grandchildren, a full, rich life stretching out before them. Her husband, Mark, 31, worked long hours as a sales manager for a local car dealership, wrestling with the ebb and flow of commissions in a competitive market. Their life wasn't opulent. They were part of the working-class backbone of Tucson, making ends meet, like many young families striving for a foothold in the growing city. They lived paycheck to paycheck, but their home was rich with laughter, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the quiet comfort of shared evenings on their small patio, watching the sun dip below the jagged silhouette of the Catalina Mountains, painting them in shades of purple and red. They had each other, and that felt like everything. Their small backyard, a patch of struggling grass and a couple of resilient oleander bushes, was a kingdom for the children, a place of endless games and imagined adventures. August 17, 1993, began like any other Tuesday. The forecast promised another day of triple-digit heat, but inside their air-conditioned bubble, the morning routine rolled on. Sarah woke early, slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Mark, who needed every ounce of sleep. She made coffee, its rich aroma filling the kitchen, packed lunchboxes for Emily's second-grade class at Ventana Vista Elementary, and laid out David's clothes for daycare. By 7:30 a.m., after a flurry of breakfast chaos involving spilled milk and last-minute backpack checks, she dropped Emily off, a quick kiss on the forehead. Then David to his daycare near La Encantada, a little shopping center that was still growing, an oasis of retail amidst the desert landscape. She waved goodbye, a familiar ache in her chest at the thought of leaving him, but also a sense of purpose as she headed to her shift. She glanced at the rearview mirror, catching David's small hand waving back. A fleeting, ordinary moment now etched into history. The day at the dental office was typical. A few cleanings, an emergency root canal, the usual hum of instruments, and the faint smell of antiseptic. She talked about weekend plans with her colleague, Lisa, a fellow mother who understood the juggling act of career and family. Sarah mentioned she was looking forward to a quiet evening at home after putting the kids to bed, maybe catching a movie with Mark or reading a good book. The sun was still high, burning bright in the cerulean sky, a relentless orb of heat, when Sarah clocked out at 3:45 p.m. She made a quick stop at the Fry's grocery store for dinner ingredients. Mark had requested his favorite lasagna, a rare treat. She picked up David from daycare at 4:30 p.m., then Emily from an after-school program. The kids were buzzing with stories, David recounting a new tower he built with blocks, Emily excitedly detailing a drawing she'd made of a desert tortoise, its shell shimmering under the imaginary sun. Sarah listened patiently, her heart full, as she navigated their beige Dodge Caravan through the late afternoon traffic on Kalb Road, the air conditioning struggling against the oppressive heat that radiated from the asphalt. She could almost feel the saguaros wilting under the sun's glare. They arrived home, and the usual evening routine unfolded. Snacks, homework help, a brief, boisterous session of hide-and-seek in the living room, followed by the familiar clanking of pots and pans as Sarah began dinner preparations. Mark called around 6 p.m., his voice tired but cheerful, promising to be home by 7 p.m. "Lasagna sounds incredible, honey," he'd said. "Rough day, looking forward to seeing you all." "Tell the Munchkins I said hi." Sarah smiled, picturing his face, the faint stubble he always had by the end of the day. "See you soon," she replied, a warmth spreading through her, anticipating the small comfort of his presence. But Mark never came home to lasagna that night, or to Sarah, or to their children. He arrived at 7:15 p.m., the sun finally beginning its descent, casting long shadows across their street. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual in their quiet neighborhood. The rich, inviting aroma of simmering tomato sauce from the lasagna filled the kitchen, but the stove was off, the pots cool to the touch. Emily's backpack lay on the floor by the front door, a telltale sign of her recent arrival. David's dinosaur toys were scattered in the living room, signs of life abruptly interrupted, a game left unfinished. "Sarah, kids," Mark called out, his voice echoing in the sudden, unsettling silence. He walked through the house, his unease growing with each empty room. The children's beds were unmade, their pajamas still folded on their dressers. Sarah's purse and keys were on the kitchen counter. Her car, the familiar beige Dodge Caravan, was still in the driveway. It was as if they had simply vanished mid-sentence, mid-action, leaving behind only the mundane remnants of an ordinary evening. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at Mark. He checked the backyard, the small pool, the neighbors' houses. No one had seen them leave. Mrs. Henderson next door, who usually kept a keen eye on the neighborhood, had only seen Sarah pulling into the driveway with the kids earlier that afternoon. He called Sarah's friend, Lisa. "No, Mark, I haven't heard from her since this afternoon," Lisa said, her voice laced with mounting concern, mirroring his own fear. Mark's parents, Sarah's parents, no one had seen or spoken to them. By 8:30 p.m., the rising dread was suffocating. His breath caught in his throat. He called 911, his voice tight with an urgency he rarely felt. The initial response was slow, frustratingly so. "Mr. Jenkins, it's only been a few hours. People go out, they lose track of time," the dispatcher said, her tone professional but dismissive, following protocol. Mark pleaded, describing Sarah's meticulous nature, her absolute devotion to their children. "She would never leave them, not for a minute. Something's wrong, I know it." He felt a growing despair as he tried to convey the anomaly of the situation, the stark unnaturalness of Sarah's disappearance. This wasn't a choice, it was an event. By midnight, after Mark's frantic persistence and a gut feeling from the responding officer, Detective Alina Rodriguez of the Tucson Police Department was on the scene. A veteran of 20 years, Rodriguez had seen it all: domestic disputes, runaways, the tragic fallout of accidents, and the grim reality of homicides. But this case, from the moment she stepped into the eerily quiet house with the untouched lasagna, felt different. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture, just absence. A gaping vacuum where a vibrant family had been moments before. The air conditioning still hummed, a lonely sound in the stillness. The neighborhood, normally a tranquil haven of suburban life, awoke to the flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers cutting through the darkness. Officers canvassed the area, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen Sarah or the children. Flyers with Sarah's smiling face, Emily's bright grin, and David's dimpled cheeks quickly materialized on lampposts and store windows across Tucson. The local news channels picked up the story, their reporters broadcasting live from the Jenkins front lawn, feeding the city's collective anxiety and speculation. A community held its breath, hoping for a miracle. Days turned into weeks. The initial flurry of activity waned, replaced by a grim, methodical grind. Mark, a hollow shell of his former self, cooperated tirelessly with police, answering the same questions repeatedly, clinging to any shred of hope, however faint. He organized volunteer search parties, venturing into the rugged, unforgiving desert terrain surrounding Tucson, the vast expanse of the Sonoran Desert seeming to mock their frantic, desperate efforts. The saguaros stood sentinel, ancient and silent, their thorny arms reaching towards the sky, offering no clues, only indifferent watch. The heat was unrelenting, the terrain treacherous, but Mark pushed on, fueled by a desperate paternal love. Detective Rodriguez and her team meticulously followed every lead, no matter how tenuous. They interviewed family, friends, coworkers, even casual acquaintances. They checked Sarah's bank accounts, phone records, medical history. Nothing. No unusual withdrawals, no strange calls, no hidden secrets. Mark was questioned extensively, as is standard procedure for spouses in missing persons cases, but his alibi was solid, corroborated by colleagues and call logs from his dealership. He was visibly distraught, his grief raw and undeniable, his eyes hollow with sleepless nights. The polygraph results, while not admissible in court, also indicated no deception. The initial theory leaned towards an abduction by a stranger, or perhaps someone Sarah knew, a brief encounter gone horribly wrong, but there was no evidence. No ransom notes, no witnesses, no signs of struggle, no abandoned vehicle further afield. The case grew colder with each passing day. The flyers, once pristine, faded under the relentless sun, peeling at the edges, their message of hope slowly eroding, replaced by the grim certainty of time. The media attention shifted to new tragedies, new mysteries. Sarah Jenkins, Emily Jenkins, and David Jenkins became names whispered with a sigh, a cautionary tale, a fading memory for most, but a living nightmare for Mark. Mark was left alone in the silent house, haunted by every memory, every corner. The children's toys remained where they'd been left, a poignant reminder of lives interrupted. The smell of Sarah's perfume lingered in her closet, a cruel ghost. He sold the house 6 months later, unable to bear the weight of its emptiness, and moved in with his parents, their quiet, unwavering support a fragile lifeline in his bottomless despair. Years crawled by, birthdays passed uncelebrated. Christmas and Thanksgiving were somber affairs, marked by the gaping hole in their family. Mark often visited the desert, sitting in silence, staring at the vastness, a futile conversation with the landscape that had swallowed his family whole. The police continued their periodic reviews of the case, a thick file on the shelf, but without new information, it remained frustratingly stagnant. Detective Rodriguez, now a lieutenant, still kept a smaller, dog-eared copy of the Jenkins file on her desk, a silent, personal promise to the vanished family. 11 years of questions, of agonizing uncertainty, of a parent's worst nightmare lived out in excruciating slow motion. Emily would have been 18, David 15, blossoming into young adults, their lives unfolding. Mark, now 42, carried the weight of his vanished family with him every single day. The desert, once a place of rugged beauty, now held an ominous, unyielding silence, a vast, indifferent tomb. The city had moved on, but Mark was forever stuck in August 1993. Then, in the spring of 2004, the desert finally spoke. A construction crew, contracted by the Arizona Department of Transportation, was working on an expansion project for a -10, several miles east of Tucson, near the edge of the Saguaro National Park. This particular stretch of land was remote, largely untouched by development, a rugged mosaic of creosote bushes, prickly pear cactus, and towering saguaros. It was the kind of place where things could be buried and forgotten for decades, its secrets guarded by the harsh environment. The work was dusty, monotonous, the constant rumble of heavy machinery the only sound for miles around. As a bulldozer, operated by a grizzled man named Frank Miller, carved a new path through the sun-baked earth, its blade snagged on something metallic, something that resisted the powerful earth-moving machinery. The impact sent a shudder through the cab. Miller stopped, killed the engine, and climbed down, grumbling about hitting a forgotten pipeline or a rock. Buried about 3 feet deep, nestled among ancient rocks and tangled roots, was a small, heavily corroded metal strongbox, its hinges rusted shut, encrusted with years of desert dirt. It looked like something out of a forgotten pioneer's stash, a relic from another era. Curiosity piqued. The crew chief, a former police reserve officer, called the local sheriff's department. Standard procedure for unusual finds on a state project. A young deputy arrived, assessed the situation, and sensing something more than just old trash or an abandoned geocache, called for Lieutenant Rodriguez. Her name, despite her promotion and the passing years, was still synonymous with cold cases in Tucson, especially those connected to missing persons. Her reputation for tenacity was legendary. Rodriguez arrived, her years of experience immediately recognizing the potential significance, the eerie calm of the scene juxtaposed with the potential for devastating revelation. The strongbox was carefully excavated and transported to the crime lab in Tucson. Its lock, rusted beyond recognition, had to be painstakingly pried open by a technician, the anticipation in the room thick and heavy. Inside, nestled within layers of fine desert dirt and ancient dust, were a few items, remarkably preserved given their exposure to the harsh desert elements and fluctuations in temperature. The first item pulled out was a faded, plastic-encased driver's license. The photo, though slightly discolored by time and moisture, was unmistakably Sarah Jenkins. Her bright, hopeful smile, frozen in time, stared out from the small rectangle, a ghost from the past. A collective gasp rippled through the small group of detectives. Next, a small, worn leather-bound photo album. Most of the pictures inside were too water-damaged or faded to be discernible, crumbling at the edges, but one, in a sturdy plastic sleeve, had miraculously survived. It was a picture of Emily and David, laughing, their arms around each other, taken perhaps a year before they vanished. Emily with her missing front teeth, David with his mischievous grin, a testament to pure, unadulterated childhood joy. It was the same iconic picture that had graced the missing flyers all those years ago, now a faded echo of what was. Finally, a small, silver locket, tarnished but still recognizable. It was engraved with the initials S. J. Sarah's locket, a treasured gift from Mark on their first anniversary, a piece he had always remembered her wearing. The pieces were undeniable, irrefutable. The discovery sent a seismic jolt through the Tucson community, reigniting a cold case that had haunted the city for over a decade. The news quickly spread, a somber echo through living rooms and coffee shops. Local and even national media converged on Tucson once more, eager to cover the break in the Jenkins case. The story, once relegated to dusty archives, was front-page news again. The devastating news reached Mark Jenkins through Lieutenant Rodriguez herself. She drove to his parents' modest home, where he still lived, carrying the small bag of artifacts. He listened, his hands trembling, his face ashen, as she described the contents of the strongbox, laying them out on the kitchen table. The driver's license, the children's photo, the locket. Relief, a strange, perverse form of it, warred with a fresh, unbearable wave of grief that buckled his knees. Sarah, and his children. The items confirmed the worst. They were gone. The hope, however faint, that they might one day walk through the door was brutally extinguished. But they also confirmed a location, a specific, remote area where something had happened, tying the victims to the vast, indifferent desert. Forensic teams swarmed the desert site for weeks, meticulously sifting through tons of earth, using ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and exhaustive grid searches. Every pebble, every grain of sand was scrutinized. They found nothing more, no human remains, no other personal effects. The strongbox was a solitary, cruel testament, a macabre message from the past dropped into the present. The location itself offered no immediate answers beyond its remoteness. Was it a dump site, a hastily abandoned cache, a desperate attempt to bury secrets? The vastness of the desert, which had always seemed beautiful, now felt menacing, holding its secrets tight. The renewed investigation brought a fresh pair of eyes to old evidence, employing techniques and technologies not available in 1993. Detectives re-interviewed everyone, from Mark to Sarah's old colleagues and neighbors, hoping that 11 years would have changed perspectives, loosened tongues, or perhaps that someone who had been too afraid to speak before might now come forward, burdened by a decade of silence. The original theories were revisited with renewed vigor: abduction, foul play, a possible connection to someone Sarah knew, who had then hidden the evidence and disappeared without a trace, only to have these few fragments unearthed by chance. But again, the trail went cold. The strongbox, while undeniably linking Sarah and the children to that desolate stretch of desert, provided no fingerprints, no DNA that could point to a perpetrator. It offered a chilling confirmation, but no path to justice. It raised more questions than it answered. Why was it buried there? Why only those specific items, not their entire lives? Where were the children's remains? Where were Sarah's remains? The strongbox hinted at a brutal end, but offered no specifics. The desert had spoken, but in riddles. The emotional impact on Mark was profound and complex. The agonizing uncertainty had been a constant torment, an open, festering wound that never healed. Now the confirmation of their deaths, even without knowing how, brought a different kind of pain, sharper and more definitive, a closure that was anything but comforting. He held the locket, polished clean by Rodriguez, before she handed it to him, running his thumb over the engraved initials, a tangible, heartbreaking piece of his vanished wife. The photograph of his children, slightly faded but their smiles still bright, was both a comfort and an agony, a snapshot of innocence forever lost. He would sometimes sit for hours, just holding them, staring into their eyes, trying to find answers that would never come. Emily and David, had they still been alive, would have been adults now, making their own lives, perhaps parents themselves. Mark often wondered what they would have become, what careers they would have chosen, what kind of people they would have grown into. The discovery in 2004 closed one door, the door of maybe they're still alive, but opened another, even wider door of why and who, a chasm of unanswered questions. The hope of a reunion was gone, replaced by the desperate plea for truth. The case of Sarah, Emily, and David Jenkins remains one of Tucson's most enduring and heartbreaking mysteries. Lieutenant Rodriguez retired years later. The Jenkins file still a prominent, heavy presence in her memory, a case that gnawed at her, a promise unfulfilled. The Strongbox, a silent witness from the desert, now sits in an evidence locker, a poignant, cruel relic of a family consumed by the unforgiving silence of the Arizona landscape. The desert gave up a small secret, but held on to the most vital truth, leaving a community, and especially a husband and father, forever scarred by what happened in 1993 and the chilling appearance of this 11 years later. The sun still beats down on Tucson, its warmth a constant reminder, but for Mark, it never quite shines as brightly as it did before August 17, 1993. The story of the Jenkins family is a stark reminder of the fragile line between everyday life and the terrifying abyss of the unknown, a testament to the lingering power of grief, the relentless passage of time, and the desert's profound, eerie capacity to both conceal and, eventually, to reveal. But not all the truth. The ghost of their laughter still echoes in the silent corners of Tucson, a haunting melody that only Mark can truly hear.